A very good evening to all of you. Welcome to day 6 of the Daily Answer Writing Initiative. This is Vilasini from Officers IAS Academy. For those of you who are watching for the first time, I kindly request you to look at the first video of this playlist. So let us move on to the question that we have to discuss for today. So the question is, what do you understand by the term invasive species? How do they pose a threat to native habitats? So before getting into the answer key, let us understand some basic concepts of invasive species and their characteristics. So in simple terms, invasive species, they are also known as non-native species. These species are known to colonize habitats as well as disrupt them. Fine. So invasive species can refer to different types of species such as plants, animals, different types of amphibians, insects, bacteria, etc. Globally, invasive species have been causing a major concern. So now let us understand what are the various characteristics of these invasive species. So the first thing is that invasive species are characterized by a high reproduction rate. It is because they are able to reproduce in large numbers, they are able to spread well. The second is that they are characterized by high dispersal ability. This characteristic allows them to spread to vast areas and colonize them effectively. The third characteristic is that they are characterized by what is called as phenotypic plasticity, which refers to the ability to adapt better physiologically to new conditions. And apart from that, they can also thrive well in new environments. These major characteristics of invasive species have given them an upper hand over several other species, allowing them to colonize areas on massive scale. So now let me tell you an interesting example of an invasive species. So it seems during the British rule, what happened was that they decided to introduce an ornamental plant by the name water hyacinth. This plant was known for its beautiful purple colored flowers. So, what happened was they decided to introduce this plant into the waters of several rivers in Bengal. The results were astonishing. This invasive plant by the name water hyacinth spread over large areas. And the major thing over here was that it depleted a large amount of dissolved oxygen found in water. When this happened, it resulted in the mortality of large amount of aquatic organisms like fish. At the same time, the livelihoods of many people who were dependent on these resources were also affected. So the havoc caused by this particular plant was so devastating that water hyacinth has also been nicknamed as Terror of Bengal. So, through this, we are able to understand some serious consequences that invasive species can cause on native habitats. So, now let us go back and take a look at the answer key and understand the different dimensions that we are supposed to incorporate while writing this answer. So, the introduction should be about what invasive species are and maybe a few lines about the characteristics as has been given over here. Now, moving on to the second part of the question, the threats posed by invasive species on native habitats. This is something that we need to stress on. So, the first thing is that competition for resources. So, invasive species can outnumber native species by competing with them for resources such as sunlight, air, water, etc. Next, habitat degradation. Invasive species can also bring about a collapse in native ecosystems by altering different features like, for example, the soil composition. disrupting hydrological cycles. So, all of this is also possible. Next, it is also possible that these invasive species can also introduce disease causing pathogens into native habitats. And the problem over here is that the native species may not be very resistant to these incoming disease attacks, which can also reduce their number. Overall, they can also alter ecosystem services. So, there are many important ecosystem services like supporting services, regulating services. So, examples for supporting services include services such as maintaining the water table, nutrient cycling, photosynthesis. At the same time, talking about regulating services, it includes services such as pollination and decomposition. When there is an alteration in the native species, it of course will cause significant damage to the native ecosystems. That is also one. Apart from that, invasive species can also outnumber existing native species and can bring about significant amount of biodiversity loss as well as local species extinctions. This is also possible. Apart from that, it is also said that when invasive species, especially plants, when they take over certain areas, they can also alter the frequency and intensity of wildfires that can occur in this particular region. So, overall, these are the major points that you should be writing to substantiate your answer. So, going by the flow, we need to understand that in this particular question, there are two important parts that you need to address. First is what are invasive species, and the second is how do they pose a threat to native habitats. So, keeping this in mind, make sure you understand and you analyze whatever points are required and structure your answers well so that your answers are good enough. So, apart from this, I also wanted to mention few points. So, it seems it is said that globally, several ecosystems are affected by almost 480,000 invasive species. These invasive species have disrupted several ecosystems. That is one. Apart from that, the major food crops that we consume, rice, wheat, maize. It is said that these crops face annual yield losses of up to 14% because of the threats posed by invasive species, which means that this issue is not just an issue which needs to be restricted towards understanding the threat posed to native ecosystems, but also has several other consequences, which could be in terms of food security, etc. So, all of this needs to be kept in mind. So let us now move forward and let us look at the best answers. So Pavitra has written a beautiful answer. So now over here, if you see, I'm analyzing Pavitra's answer. So now Pavitra has given a statistics. So usually it is said that if at all you're mentioning a statistics or a finding of a particular report, please mention the report also. It will make more sense. So going forward, you have also mentioned that what invasive species are, which is appreciated. So one thing that I wanted to point out over here is you have mentioned how they pose threats to native habitats, where you have analyzed the threats separately for aquatic and terrestrial habitats rather than writing them separately because the points are going to be similar. Have one common heading and several dimensions below. And also make sure you underline important points. Otherwise, this is a good answer. Moving forward, there is one more answer written by Jessina Sharon of C batch. So looking at this particular answer, it is the structure of the answer is good. You have started with what invasive species are. You have also elaborated on the various characteristics of invasive species, all the 4 points that we had mentioned in the key also, which is again good. Talking about threats, you have also given many examples, which is appreciated. So rather than dividing this into direct and indirect threats, you can have one common heading, which is threats to native habitats, and you can substantiate that with findings of reports or even examples. And then you can conclude your answer, which is again good. The next answer is that of Felix. So Felix has also written a very good answer about what invasive species are, what the threats are. So some of these points are very good. He has also justified this with certain examples like Prosopis julifora, has been mentioned as an example over here, which is again very nice. And overall, the points are good. Felix has also written a way forward, which is good. Here, the conclusion is also nice. So, one thing that I want to emphasize over here is while writing these answers, please understand where to place due emphasis on. For example, here there are two parts, and the demand of the question is discuss. So, please address the first part as well as the second part. So, it happens that in most of the answers that we had seen, half of you have written about invasive species in almost half of the entire page, which is not very appreciated. So please understand where to stress on more. Please give adequate as well as relevant points for the second part of the question also. Underline important points. Make sure you use key terms as well as give bold introduction and conclusion for all of your answers. Please definitely keep this in mind. So further moving forward, the upcoming question, that is the question for tomorrow, is do you think that India can achieve the target of 20% blending of ethanol with petrol by 2025? Substantiate. So, for this, we will conclude today's session. Guna Mathivanan sir will be taking over the daily answer writing from tomorrow. Thank you.